Disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of USA Global TV and Radio. The content presented is for informational purposes only and is intended to foster open discussion and debate. Viewer discretion is advised. USA Global TV and Radio does not endorse any particular viewpoint and encourages viewers to seek out additional information and perspectives.
Welcome home to USA Global TV and Radio, a place where dreams take flight, with authentic storytelling, diverse perspectives and meaningful conversations, where global stories unite and bridges are built beyond all borders. Discover world-class education, entertainment, hope and inspiration. Together, we're building bridges worldwide. Subscribe to our channel, USA Global TV. Download our app, USA Global TV. Be our guest or join our team. Visit usaglobaltv.com. Thanks to our founder and executive producer, Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck. Music score by Yeffy Tang from Cloud Road Music. Voiceover artist Mike Porter. Creative direction by Paul Garcia. USA Global TV and Radio, your home for global connection. All rights reserved. This video and its contents are the exclusive property of USA Global TV and Radio. Unauthorized use, duplication or redistribution in any form is strictly prohibited.
Welcome to Saving America. This is your host, Dr. David D. Schein. As usual, we have hot stories from all over the world. Trump economy continues its roller coaster. The U.S. economy needs to add as many as 120,000 jobs a month to stay up with the population growth and course graduations. Against that benchmark, job growth has been anemic for a couple of years. Yes, remember that the liars running the stats for the last year, the Biden-Harris, overstated job growth by 800,000 jobs. I believe the Trump administrators are trying to get it right. Several recent months had no job growth, and for December, looks like only 50,000 new jobs. An interesting stat is that the unemployment rate dropped to 4.4%. But how is that possible? Well, that means many job seekers are discouraged and have stopped looking for work. So sometimes what looks good news really is not. I know many of my fine students are having challenges finding full-time positions, although internships seem to be plentiful, so hopefully those will lead to full-time positions. The lack of jobs is blamed on AI and the uncertainty involving tariffs. The Fed continued its slow rate reduction last month, knocking the rate down another quarter point to 3.72% effective rate. With all this going on, buckle your seatbelts for the 2026 economy. Unrest in Iran equals mass murder. Iran admits to 2,000 people killed in the protests against the current extremist government. The problem is that it may be much, much worse than that. I saw a number as high as 16,000 killed, and I believe at least 5,000 have been killed to date. The murderous regime is going to start hanging as many as 800 protesters they had in custody, but Trump threatened Iran and they reportedly backed down, at least for now. In turn, Trump withdrew plans to bomb Iran again. This in sharp contrast to the failed Obama administration's fake warnings in 2009. Iran takes Trump seriously after the USA pulverized their nuclear bomb facility. Trump swears his support for the protesters, but I would like to know exactly what that looks like. I support anything other than American boots on the ground. Time to free the people of Iran from the slavery conditions they are now under. I do know that the economic sanctions are crippling the Iranian economy, and that is driving the current round of protests. Word is that the terrorists running Iran have already planned an escape to Russia. Hope that happens soon, but then again, that creates the infamous void, and I'm not sure that the good guys are in a position to take over that void. Attacks on ICE agents continue. It's no secret that I'm a hardcore law and order person. I ask the public to reserve judgment following the deadly shooting in Minnesota. Well, the riots continue, but the news that I've seen appears to overwhelmingly support the officer shooting to defend himself against a deadly threat. In the meantime, two TDA associates were shot and wounded while resisting arrest in Portland. Again, I support the ICE agents. The criminal illegals were apparently using the vehicles they were in to threaten the ICE agents. And an ICE agent was attempting to arrest a criminal illegal when that person broke away and the agents pursued him. Then two other bad guys dived into the fray with, get this, snow shovels and broomsticks. The agent resorted to using his handgun to wing the first suspect for his own safety. All three are in custody. The agent managed to survive with minor injuries. I would have endorsed kill shots for all three if I had a say in that case. The anti-American morons running Oregon and Minnesota continue to shout anti-American slop and are preventing their local police from protecting ICE from the rioters. All I can say is that when any reasonable person reviews the criminal records of those being arrested by ICE, it is clear that this is for the benefit of all of us. These scumball politicians are not acting for their constituents, and that's for sure. The Greenland controversy. I'm on record as not supporting any effort for the U.S. to take over Greenland. It makes no sense to go after allied countries. Recently, several NATO countries sent troops to Greenland in a show of force. That's great, but they should be doing it to show Russia and the CCP, not Trump. In previous Saving America episodes, I've emphasized that we need to have great relations with our allies. Think about it. We can do less and can focus on high-tech developments if our allies will cover their share. So I hope Trump will soon announce that due to the positive developments with the rest of NATO, Greenland is secure. The U.S. should use our access to Greenland to develop a Golden Dome and anti-missile armaments there. We simply do not need to take over the country to do that. At the same time, I'm disturbed about the anti-civilization reports coming from some of our allied countries. For instance, a German woman does more jail time than the rapist she criticized. The story is that 9 attackers gang raped a 15-year-old girl in Hamburg, Germany. This woman, who was commenting on the punishment of the rapist, was found guilty of defamation of one of the attackers. She called him a disgraceful rapist pig. The rapist served no jail time since he was a teenager. However, she, the woman commenting on this, was jailed for a weekend. This is ridiculous for sure. Unfortunately, I'm hearing more and more stories like this from the UK as well. I hope our allies like the UK and Germany will get on board with real Western civilization. Both countries are starting to sound more and more like Iran. Details on the billions of dollars in fraud losses in Minnesota continue to flow. As America tips the $39 trillion mark for official national debt, the news from Minnesota continues to shock the conscience. It also appears more likely that Tampon Timmy and his buddies in Minnesota were well aware of the scams and kept quiet since they wanted the votes from the scammers and their supporters. The reports include Medicaid, which reports indicate total $18 billion in expenditures since 2018. There is no accurate report as to how much of these funds was designed to help low-income households has been now flushed down the toilet. I saw a report indicating that bundles of money have been documented going to Somalia. The Fed prosecutor called the situation industrial level fraud. Other programs being looted include Medicare and SNAP. I know taxpayers like myself are screaming for prosecutions of all involved. Serious prison time and recovery of funds must be obtained in these cases. As my regular listeners know, I favor total elimination of most of these programs at the federal level. The states can decide what to spend their money on and will then be the proper guardians of those funds. As we say, then they will have skin in the game. America needs energy. Due to the expansion of AI and quantum computing, America needs even more energy than previously projected. At the same time, the Trump administration has gone full tilt against wind power. I take a more balanced approach. I agree that many wind farms, especially recently, are poorly conceived and can constitute more risk to commerce and wildlife than is justified. However, I have been to places that have successfully developed some wind power, so I'm not against it in a blanket fashion. The Trump Department of Interior is reportedly pausing all wind farms at this time. The department is claiming that the proposed wind farms constitute national security risks. I'm not exactly sure how those wind farms would constitute such a risk, and the reports that I saw did not provide much detail. Trump has been very outspoken opponent of wind farms since before he was elected, so more to come on this. Department of War targets Senator Mark Kelly. Kelly is a Dem senator from Arizona who stupidly joined a handful of clowns who claimed that active members of the military could refuse unlawful orders. They, of course, failed to define what they considered unlawful. This has been labeled by Trump and others as seditious behavior. I agree with that, though, given the fine line here, I doubt anyone will be thrown in the brig. In an interesting approach, Kelly, who retired from the Navy in 2011, is being activated so that the feds may challenge his rank. If they are successful, they could bust his rank, causing him to lose future retirement pay from the military. As it is, he is what is referred to as a double dipper. That is someone who gets two or more federal pensions. So other than bruising his ego, it is unlikely it'll cost him very much, if anything. Kelly claims this is a political attack. I think the action actually is appropriate. However, I would quickly volunteer that I want all federal pensions, except the military, stopped immediately. The Fed employees can live with savings plans. That's right, the infamous 401k plans that the vast majority of private sector employees have available to them, not the lucrative pensions like our so-called public servants.
All rise.
Our series Interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. Once you hear from our panel, I'm sure that you will agree they each deserve the moniker of interesting person. Saving America welcomes Adam Kissel, Madison Marino-Doan, and Rachel Alexander Kahn. And Adam Kissel is visiting lecturer in formal organizations at Trinity College, visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation, and a board member of the National Association of Scholars. He also serves on the America's 250 and Advisory Council on Civics History and America's Future. It's a master's from the University of Chicago, a bachelor's in English and American Literature and Language from Harvard. He served in the first Trump administration as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Higher Education Programs with the United States Department of Education. Madison Marino-Doan is the policy analyst in the Center for Education Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Her work focuses on higher education reform regarding affordability and accountability. She also writes on K-12 education choice initiatives. Doan is also a visiting fellow with the Maryland Family Institute, where she writes and comments on issues related to education choice, parental rights, and local education. Previously, she served in multiple roles for U.S. Congressman Brian Babin, Texas 36, most recently as legislative correspondent, where she managed his portfolio on religious freedom and values. Her work has been featured in Fox News, Washington Examiner, Washington Times, The Daily Signal, and the Educational Freedom Institute, among others. She graduated summa cum laude from Lamar University with a double major in economics and finance, has a certificate in humanizing education policy from the Pepperdine School of Public Policy. Rachel Alexander Kahn teaches at Louisiana State University, Franciscan Missionaries of Our Lady University, and Sequitur Classical Academy in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and teaches remotely for Belmont Abbey College's online master's in classical liberal education. She earned a PhD and master's in political science from Baylor University and her BA from Washington and Lee University. Our three guests are here today because they're co-authors of the new book, Slacking, Guide to Ivy League Miseducation. Of course, we're also assuming that the faculty members have a good education and can actually teach those courses. And I'm beginning to get a little nervous about some of the qualifications if we've got people coming through programs like this and then creating the courses that they're teaching. Is what type of classical education did they have that they think that this is a good idea for education for our current generation? So this thing hasn't have we really thought through this whole model? And because it is a concern. And sometimes people say, well, in my professional life I never used Beowulf, which, by the way, I read in German in college. But I teach business law. I'm an attorney in addition to a scholar, and I teach business law. I teach business ethics. And one of the classic books that I mention is John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, which in my opinion is one of the 100 great books of American authors. And of course, he also wrote Mice and Men, again, books that shared with people the historic experience that many Americans went through as America went through the Great Depression and the difficult times associated with it. And it's interesting because I will ask my class, there's a particular point where a piece of business law ties in to a scene in the Grapes of Wrath. And I say to my students, how many of you have read the Grapes of Wrath? Zero. And there's another classic book, and there's also a Shakespeare play. And I'll ask questions about that. And it's like, now I'll say to them, do you know about the Game of Thrones? Most of them know Game of Thrones. But it's kind of stunning because I kind of look at this, but is this a rolling problem? In other words, have we also rolled this down into the high schools? Because I read Grapes of Wrath and I read Beowulf in college, but I read Grapes of Wrath and Mice and Men in high school ex-English.
You bring up a very important point that someone like E.D. Hirsch also mentions. He says, if you want to have good experiences out in the world with other intelligent people, you need to be part of the cultural life of American civilization and Western civilization, so that when somebody talks about Grendel the monster, you can say, oh, yes, I read that in Beowulf. And when someone talks about the American plains and the difficulty of being in a wagon and trying to survive on the frontier, you need to understand what that experience was like for so many Americans. If you know none of that, but what you know is pop culture, you're not going to have a good experience among other intellectually stimulating people.
I think David, you pointed to two really important problems, which is that, for one, a lot of parents of current students haven't had a classical education themselves, just like the professors you're referring to who maybe haven't had a classical education or just a genuinely liberal education. And so when they're looking at colleges with their kids, they don't necessarily know what to look for or know what to avoid. And then secondly, college students are increasingly struggling with literacy, not just with cultural literacy, but with reading comprehension, basic reading comprehension. And so professors who do desire to teach these great texts, Beowulf, Homer's Iliad, they struggle to assign those texts because the students are struggling to read them themselves. So I think it's a complex problem that has issues at every level.
There's a couple sayings about Harvard. One is the hardest thing about Harvard is getting in. There's so much grade inflation if everyone's getting A minuses. The other one, which I hadn't heard again until recently, is you can tell a Harvard man, but you can't tell him much.
Absolutely. Madison, go ahead.
I just wanted to add on a positive note, I think there is a revival of classical education, at least at the K-12 level. So Rachel has actually done some great work whenever she was a visiting fellow at Heritage and kind of documenting the rise in classical education that we've seen in the K-12 level. And so I think that is something that's, positive and moving forward. Like, we're going to have more students educated in a classical manner, especially as we have expanded educational choice programs in states all across the country.
Yeah, it's a fascinating process. And our third question is, how does your new book help those students and their parents who still want to go to an Ivy? What are we telling them?
Yeah, so happily, we did find at each of these schools good courses for students to take. There are few and far between, but they are there. And so the problem really is students aren't always aware of what they should take. So we're hoping our book can serve as a roadmap for students headed to the Ivies to know what they should take. So at the end of each chapter, we break down the general education requirements into two lists. We have a slacker list of basically the worst courses offered, or some of the worst courses offered. And then we have a striver list for students who are striving to get a good education. And those are highlighting the courses students should look for and should try to take. I looked at Yale and Dartmouth. Both of these universities have humanities sequences that students can take basically in the history of Western thought. Brown had a few of those courses as well. So they're there. You just have to know what you're looking for.
It's an interesting challenge. The flip side of that is, as we all know, it's difficult to get into the Ivies, and they're very expensive. What would you say to parents in terms of where else should they be looking? In other words, what are your alternatives if you say, well, I'm a straight A student at my high school and I've got, great SAT scores or ACT scores. Where else should they consider? In because the school rankings are unfortunately seem to be. I've lost all confidence in rankings, by the way, because of the people that are doing the ranking are the same people who are coming up with these courses, right?
Right. I'll let Madison talk about our college guide at Heritage. Uh, but you should be thinking about a college like University of Chicago's college, which has a small number of carefully chosen courses, for the most part, that educate you in human being and citizen, classes of social and political thought, the natural sciences, the physical sciences, and the writing requirement, which is integrated into the humanities requirement. That's the kind of 75-year tradition that Chicago has with its undergrads that is worth it if the main thing you're looking for is a high quality college curriculum. But Madison, would you take a couple minutes and talk about our college guide?
Sure, sure. So Heritage in 2024 launched our Choosing College with Confidence Guide. We initially evaluated around 300 colleges and universities all around the country. Last year, in the most recent edition, we upped that number to about 987 total university and colleges that we were looking at. And we ranked the three colleges, gave them either a green light, a red light, or a yellow light. The green light these are our recommended colleges. Yellow light was, hey, it's worth considering. We can't vouch for the entire school system, but we can say that they have these great honors programs or great books programs, other things that students could consider taking part of. And then last one was our red rating, so not recommended. So there were like 25 different metrics that we looked at, from FIRE's free speech rankings to whether or not students or whether colleges have adopted the Chicago Statement on free speech. We also looked at graduation rates, median income post-graduation. We looked at ACTA's, the American Council of Alumni and Trustees, have this great what will they learn, where they actually look at the core curriculum requirements at all the universities. So there was a ton of different metrics that went into our ratings. But if you're curious about, if parents and families are curious about looking at taking a closer look at colleges and universities, they could go on the Heritage website and take a look at our Choosing College with Confidence Guide.
I think we strove pretty hard to find a green light in every state. So in some states, it was harder than others. But if you want to stay close to home, there might be a good college that we can recommend.
And lastly, I would just add one takeaway I've had from this project is that parents and students should be much more conscientious about college visits, going to the colleges they're considering and sitting in classes that they're interested in, not just going to see what the campus looks like or what the student life is like, but actually going and sitting in on lectures and seminars to see what the education that given college provides. So I think that can go a long way for finding a truly good fit and not just, following prestige or the rankings.
And you've mentioned a couple times Bad Bunny, and I have to admit, I have never heard of Bad Bunny until the NFL made a horrendously stupid decision, which it kind of doubles down on the direction the Ivies have been going. And reportedly, he's going to be the featured entertainment during halftime at the Super Bowl. And since I am busy doing real things, I don't watch any sports. It doesn't really make a difference. I know a lot of people watch the Super Bowl to watch the commercials, which I don't think is a sweeping endorsement of what's going on there anyway, but it's kind of interesting. So I got a chance to look her, whatever, up, and it didn't sound like anybody that I could associate with a pro football team. So this, what people, I know some people don't like the term, but I can't think of a better term, but this wokeness that has led to the slacking, it seems to have permeated past the Ivies and into social our society in general. But I think that Harvard seems to have caught and I'm trying to remember her last name or his last name, but we talked about this on Saving America recently, is Harvard has announced that they have a trans person coming over to teach 2 courses next semester, and the person's name is, I know the first name is Vagina, I forget the last name, and Adam's nodding his head, so I think he knows who we're talking about.
I do. I think the person goes by the last name Vagistan. It's
Yes.
very disappointing. And they're teaching RuPaul's Drag Race, some kind of television show. It's low culture, low side of pop culture that Harvard, I think, is doing on purpose to say, we're Harvard, we can teach what we want. We don't want to see these outsiders tell us what to do. And here's an example of that. The first part of your comment I thought was also important, because it's the leaders of America who go to the Ivy League colleges, and then you find them in business, you find them running the NFL, you find them in some of the key institutions of society. So if we don't get our Ivies right, it's a big challenge for America.
Please proceed.
Johnson & Johnson to cut drug prices. Mega corporation Johnson & Johnson cut a deal with the Trump administration to cut drug prices in exchange for tariff relief on some items. They also have committed to building 2 new factories in the United States. This follows deals previously made with 9 other major drug companies regarding Medicaid and cash buyers. This is a little touted story about the efforts of the current administration to help Americans. It has irritated me for years that American drug prices are often 3 and 4 times higher than in other countries. Right, we Americans have been ripped off by the drug companies for decades. The Johnson & Johnson plants will be built in North Carolina and Pennsylvania. The investment is estimated to be about $55 billion.
How does the defendant plead?
Could MAHA hurt the GOP in the 2026 elections? MAHA stands for Make America Healthy Again, a take on the Make America Great Again Trump theme. The leader of this is HHS Secretary RFK Jr. A controversial issue is the number and type of childhood vaccines recommended by his agency. I'm a big fan of necessary and effective childhood vaccines. I'm not an expert on this, so I have to defer to the medical community on this matter. It does seem to me that too many vaccines are being recommended for our little people, but which ones? Apparently, a lot of young family members prefer the larger number of vaccines, 17 versus the now recommended 11. I'm very surprised by this. So the story is that the GOP candidates in swing districts who support MAHA may take a beating in November. On the positive front, voters generally like MAHA other than vaccines, like the elimination of questionable chemicals and colors in common food.
Please raise your right hand.
Food preservatives may be bad for you. Consistent with MAHA, some recent studies indicate that food preservatives may increase the risk of type 2 diabetes and some cancers. The report is based on Nutrinet Santé cohort. This is a long-term research study from France, which started in 2009. From my perspective, I like long-term studies since they are more credible, in my opinion, than the many short-term studies that we hear about in the news on a pretty frequent basis. An amazing 170,000 adults were tracked in the study to determine the impact of diet on health over the long run. Type 2 is becoming a major threat to health in America, so understanding the French study results can have a major impact. The level of detail in the study is compelling. 58 preservatives were identified, 17 eaten by at least 10% of the study group. In turn, a batch of common food additives were tied to type 2 diabetes. This list included potassium sorbate, potassium metasulfite, sodium nitrite, acetic, citrics, and phosphoric acids, sodium acetate, calcium propionate, sodium ascorbate, alpha tocopherol, sodium erythorbate, and rosemary extracts. That last one really had me surprised. I know that I've done all I can for the last 5 years to eliminate sodium nitrate and sodium nitrite from any foods that I buy. Yes, I'm the irritating guy in the grocery store who stands there and reads all the ingredients of everything in every food product that I buy. The study indicated those who consumed the most of those preservatives experienced a significantly higher risk than those who consumed the least. A second study that studied the same participating pool data found that some of these additives contributed to breast and prostate cancer, including sorbates, sulfites, sodium nitrite, and acetates. So, a word to the wise, be careful what you eat.
Objection, Your Honor.
Trump has called on Fed Chair Powell to lower the official lending rate, not looking likely so far. Housing has shifted from a seller's to a buyer's market. This is a reflection of economic uncertainty, but also those high mortgage rates.
May I remind you, you're still under oath.
Business students, business persons, or consumers, business law impacts much of what you do. This segment is designed to help you get past the headlines on key stories. Supreme Court rejects challenge by Big Tobacco on new cigarette warning labels. As a lifetime non-smoker, and in fact, someone who campaigned against smoking in public in the late 1970s, I find this latest SCOTUS ruling of special interest. The Surgeon General first declared smoking a health hazard in 1964. A year later, the first warning notices were required on cigarette packs and in advertising. Advertising on TV and radio was banned by 1971. By 1998, a major settlement with the industry caused almost all advertising to cease. In 2009, the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act granted the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, the authority to regulate tobacco products. This included the authority to regulate some of the industry's marketing practices. The current dispute started in 2020 when the FDA issued a rule that required health warnings on cigarette packages and in advertisements to cover the top 50% of the area on the front and back panels of packages and at least 20% of the area at the top of cigarette ads. The FDA provided text and graphic images that are pretty compelling, folks, like a person missing toes or having black toes. So several major tobacco companies went to federal court to block the new FDA rule, claiming First Amendment protection. They actually won the first round in Texas courts. However, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals reversed the trial court in a unanimous ruling that the FDA rule was constitutional under a prior Supreme Court standard that permits the government to compel commercial speech so long as the speech is purely factual, uncontroversial, justified by a legitimate state interest, and not unduly burdensome. Then Big Tobacco, good citizens that they are, appealed to the Supreme Court before the proceedings could return to the trial court. SCOTUS recently bounced the case, declining to reverse the Fifth Circuit. So watch for some pretty creepy illustrations if you're still among the smokers.
Silence in the court.
The accused criminal reported gang member Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia, the illegal alien deported to his native El Salvador earlier this year, has been brought back to the United States as a result of court rulings. So the taxpayers wasted more money on this garbage who should have stayed in his home country. This is the illegal who clowns like Senator Chris Van Hollen went to visit with your taxpayer money. Don't forget that next time he runs for re-election. On the good news side, Abrego Garcia is not out running around. The Justice Department met him with an indictment for human trafficking, which includes 2 felony counts. They have video evidence. I hope he will do a long stint in a high-security prison and then be deported back to El Salvador. He should never be free again to roam the streets of this country and commit crimes. Our series Interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. Once you hear from our next guest, I'm sure that you'll agree that she deserves the moniker of interesting person. Saving America welcomes Paulette J. Buchanan.
Thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate it. And I hope that the information I give to people will definitely pique their interest and get people interested in this topic.
Well, we're going to tell people a little bit about you. You've earned an MA in European History and a BA in History and Political Science and Public Policy. You're a former educator who's taught courses across all levels, even at the Navy Education Office on the Groton, Connecticut submarine base. Since 2007, she's worked alongside other victims and legislators in effort to bring about needed changes in the law to better protect individuals and society. She's a member of International Cultic Studies Association and speaks about topics such as cults and the law. She's the author of Fighting for Justice, Religious Fraud, Mental Illness, and the Collapse of Law and Order. This book tells the true story of her quest to protect herself and her family from the abuse and attacks of her brothers that continued from childhood into adulthood. We welcome her back for her second visit to Saving America to update our audience on this important topic.
Yes. I wrote the book actually at the suggestion of a civil rights attorney when I explained to her the lengthy details of everything that we were going through that included death threats and things like that, primarily from one brother, but the other brothers kind of joined in. They have their own series of problems, mental health problems. But yeah, we were getting death threats. And again, my brother, the primary one, is claiming to be a religious leader, calls himself a pastor, claims that he runs ministries, and basically scams and dupes people on the internet into believing this. He has no qualifications for any of this. And he just unleashed himself on me through the use of the internet. Through defamation that was absolutely horrific. I'm an educator around children. He was accusing me of being a child abuser. He was accusing me of being a domestic terrorist. All kinds of crazy things. And we worked with our legislators. We worked with law enforcement. I did have an arrest warrant against him for harassment at one point. But nothing was being done on both the state and federal level. There was a federal cyber stalking law that we tried to get enforced. And repeatedly we were told by, in Connecticut primarily, but also by the feds in Georgia and the feds in Connecticut, that yes, he's breaking the law, but no, we're not going to put out the money to enforce the law. And that's just patently wrong. That's a violation of our most basic civil rights and our basic human rights to live in peace and quiet.
This is the background that led to your writing the book. What else happened? Give people a little bit of an idea of the timeline, because this didn't happen just in 2 or 3 weeks.
No, this actually has taken place from the early 2000s. I mean, really, it goes back earlier than that. But where he really started going after us was he started suing us. It's called pro se, or you represent yourself by oneself. Yes. Without an attorney. It's quick and easy. Few $100s, you can sue anybody you want to for no reason whatsoever. And so we did everything we could to fight these lawsuits. We kept urging the judges to put some kind of injunction against him, and they just didn't care. We won every lawsuit. He sued other people, his ex-wife, a church that he was once involved with, his ex-wife's husband. He's probably sued a good number of people. We're just not aware of the full scope of it. In the end, he ended up suing our attorneys and judges. So we ended up getting both state and federal injunctions and judgments against him with a treble amount, because he was deemed an abusive or vexatious litigant on both the state level and on the federal level. And so we have permanent injunctions against him because of this. But nobody should have to go through 9 lawsuits. It took 9 lawsuits to finally get full, complete justice. And we have been able to recover some of the judgment that we won against him. I consider it a miracle, because he is making money under the table somehow. He takes Mediterranean cruises and he takes other types of trips. And he can't do that on the income that he has claimed in the courts that he makes. So there's something kind of cheesy going on there. But
and I did want to ask you, tell us what jurisdiction you said you did get a federal injunction. What court, of course, federal courts sit in particular states, and you have state courts. What states are we dealing with here?
It wasn't until we moved to Tennessee that we got the state judgment. That was
Okay,
the
you moved to a more
junction.
conservative jurisdiction that
Absolutely.
tends to be more protective of civil
Yep.
rights, though also, generally speaking, in the South, we've seen more protection of religious rights. But in this case, I think that the judges saw pretty quickly that they didn't regard this as a religion that they, a traditional religion that they would normally protect, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we were actually told by victim advocates in Connecticut because of how dangerous my brother has proven himself to be. You need to flee to another state. You're never going to get
Yes.
justice in Connecticut.
And is he
Yeah.
still in Connecticut, though? Is
Oh
he
no,
still operating?
he's been in Georgia the whole time,
Okay.
in Fulton County and now in Gwinnett County. And so,
These are big counties in Georgia, by the way. These are
right, and
both highly populated counties. Yes.
right, and we've all heard about Fulton County.
Oh,
So,
yeah. It's
um,
quite a sight. What year did you publish your book? Just so we get that on
it,
the
it,
record
it
here.
was at the end of, I believe, 2020. Let me think about this. 2021. I'm trying to remember
Okay.
because it's, yeah. And, but yeah, we got the other federal injunction through the Northern Georgia federal courts. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So,
And
and
then what we wanted you to visit on, because you caught us up at where we were in our first interview. What you have been working, especially subsequent to the publication of your book, on the legislative front to make it easier for you and others who are being harassed by such people to get some help. And so what has happened there?
yeah, just to kind of backstep a little bit, back in 2018, when he sued us here the first time, we contacted our legislators, and there was already a bill being proposed that would address abusive litigation. And we urged our legislators to join in with that. We told them our story. And so, consequently, with our story added into other victim stories, that law was passed to stop abusive litigation and to impose penalties against people, such as permanent injunctions and judgments against them. Since that time, we have been trying to address other issues related to, like, for example, religious fraud. And it was a couple of years after this that Tennessee passed a law that anybody who gets a mail order ordination cannot perform marriages, because that is one of the tactics that a lot of cultists will do, is that they get these, mail order ordinations. They're really
Well,
quite ridiculous.
and it was very famous when I remember years ago, there was this Korean fellow running around, and he did like these mass marriages
Yeah,
in
the
stadiums and
Moonies.
stuff, the
Yep,
Moonies.
the
And
Moonies.
so when you mentioned the business about doing the weddings, I immediately thought of the good old Moonies. And of
Yeah,
course, a lot of these things, they hit a certain point and then they fade out as people realize that most of them, I don't want to say all of them, but most of them turn out to be something other than what people expected. And of course, the worst of them was Jim Jones,
right. Yeah.
where he actually got a group of his followers to, because he was being legally investigated in the United States, moves down to South America, Central America, and
Yeah.
of course resulted in a horrible, horrible situation. But there's certainly quite a number of reports of people who have gone to something kind of regarding it like, oh, maybe this is kind of like going to a summer camp and we'll do some yoga
Right.
and all that. And then they find out that they can't leave and things like that. So there's certainly been a lot of abuse of these opportunities, you might say, to have a gathering of people interested in a particular subject.
And it's like you mentioned that, one goes away, but there are so many others that crop up. It used to be, before the internet, it would take years, sometimes decades, for a cult to get off the ground, because mostly the word was spread by word of mouth, sometimes by advertising, like in, newspapers or something like that. But now with the internet, these cult leaders can get followers within seconds, really. And that's the danger of the internet. But yeah, the Tennessee legislature, we have been supporting that. Unfortunately, then they did pass it into law, but it's being challenged legally in the courts. And it's just kind of sitting there. The judges really, I haven't read any new updates on that. But some other things that we've addressed is Tennessee, and I think some other states as well, have passed laws that put harsher penalties on clergy when they commit sexual offenses, either against children or against adults. And of course, I think we've all been reading in the newspapers over the last several years that there have been a statute of limitations that have been extended for child victims of sexual abuse by clergy. Whether these clergy are ordained officially through an organization or whether they're self-ordained. If they pass themselves off, they call themselves a pastor or a rabbi or a guru or a bishop or some other type of religious title, and they're operating in that way, then they are considered clergy. And so if they commit these offenses, then they can face harsher penalties in a state like Tennessee. There's a situation actually in Maryville. They call it Merville here in Tennessee. I still haven't picked up the Tennessee accent, as you can tell. And they have a sort of a charismatic Pentecostal type church that they had a school and they had teachers. And one of the teachers, at least one of them, was sexually abusing children. And unfortunately, the police department and apparently some court staff, and maybe including the prosecutor's office, were somehow connected or supportive of this church down in Maryville, Tennessee. And it's now being investigated by the Attorney General's office here in Tennessee, because the perpetrator got a very light sentence, a mere slap on the wrist, which is a stab in the heart of the victims, the children.
Sure, absolutely.
So that is because, and this is where I emphasize, make your voice heard, is that a number of community members and others outside of the community have spoken up and demanded that the prosecutor, the district attorney, and the judge be held accountable for this ridiculously offensive sentence that does not address this guy still has his teaching license. It's like that is just unheard of. That is just inexcusable. So these are the kinds of things that we are still doing. It is a slow process. I still wish that they would have a clergy authentication law where nobody can claim to be a pastor or a guru or a rabbi without having certification from an accredited institution. And, anybody can call themselves a pastor. Anybody.
I think that's a wonderful suggestion. And Paula, you touched on something a minute ago, and I wanted you to expand on it as our, our third point is you talked briefly about how social media has enabled harassment, but how do you and other victims turn that around and use social media in a positive sense to communicate?
Yeah, years ago, we were advised by a number of attorneys to say, look, your brother, because he's out there calling himself a pastor, he's made himself a public figure, a limited purpose public figure. If he's addressing any kind of public issues or anything else, which he does, that makes him a public figure. And for that reason, we can access court documents, police records, which he has plenty of, and publish that for the sake of public interest, to warn people this guy is not who he portrays himself to be, and that these are the official public records. Police records and court records are public. Unless deemed otherwise by a judge, they are considered public record. And with that, you can use that to publish information. And far more people are doing that against these religious frauds, these cult leaders, these abusive clergy. Sometimes they're in denominations, sometimes they're just freewheeling it. And that is an important thing to remember, that we have a voice, that we have a free speech right to defend our names and reputations. Many times it's the tactic of cults to beat down people with defamation, to basically assassinate their character so that they can appear to be pure as the driven snow themselves. So we did that. We published information on the internet about my brother. and about anybody associated with him who also aided and abetted him. Now, also, what has been wonderful is that the US Congress, this is almost unheard of, where you have substantial bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate, given our divided times as they are, how divisive things are, that we were able to get passed in our legislators the Take It Down Act. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it has to do with anybody who's publishing information, primarily images, and in such a way that is sexually insulting to the person, whether they are engaged in intimate acts or whatever, or using AI to make them appear to be posing nude and things like this, or doing lewd acts of any sort.
And this is actually very timely because I just saw that Senator Ted Cruz here in Texas has proposed a new law that would ban trashing your former girlfriend and running images. And of course, now you don't even need to have taken a nude picture of your girlfriend. Right. You can just take her face and put it on a nude AI body, and it's gotten really out of control. So I'm not I'm not endorsing Ted Cruz or not, but I'm just saying that I think that the law on a federal basis, I think, makes a lot of sense, because sometimes I get concerned because the internet is international and all that. I did want to ask you quickly a follow-up on that. Are there any particular sites? I mean, are we talking Facebook or is there any particular site that you find is particularly helpful? Because we also have things like Nextdoor, like I'm in my neighborhood's next door and things like that. I didn't know if you found a particular set of sites that have been more useful than others for the
they all come with benefits, but they also come with risks, and that's just the nature of the beast with the internet. And as you said, it's global. So, I mean, it really is a huge problem with how much can you control. The Take It Down Act, which has now become law, is great. But it's kind of like the federal stalking law. We tried to get that enforced. If you have a U.S. attorney or assistant U.S. attorney who is not willing to enforce the laws, and that's the problem we're seeing in a lot of areas in our country where laws just are not being enforced by the police or by the district attorneys or state's attorneys or by the judges themselves. And so that's the crux of the matter. This is a great law. The federal cyber stalking laws were great laws, but can we get them enforced? And that is the issue. And the only way we can get that done is really put pressure on our judges. In some cases, judges are elected. In a lot of cases, they're appointed. But whatever the case is, we need to make our voices heard. And especially if we ourselves have been victimized in this way, we need to make our voices heard. I have dealt with people who have gone through far worse than I have, as bad as the situation has been. And I know the despair you can feel when it's like, nobody is helping me. My tax dollars are paying for these officials to do their jobs, and they're not doing their jobs. And so I think collectively, victims need to not give in to despair, but really utilize anger in a good way and keep persisting. Be that pain in the neck, be that squeaky wheel, and just keep persisting in insisting that your rights be upheld and your voices heard.
Thank you so much, Paulette J. Buchanan. How can our audience get more information about you, your efforts regarding cults, and of course, your book?
My book website is fightingforjusticebook.com. And on that site, there is some more information, but you can also link to Amazon.com. You can look up my book even like in Walmart or Barnes & Noble. It's sold there as well. And also we have another site called StopAbusiveLawsuits.com. And that includes a boatload of information, a lot of documentation. It is an extensive website, but it backs up a lot of what I wrote about in my book.
The defense rests, Your Honor.
Pope Leo XIV is the first American pope. That's over 2,025 years, folks. Yes, as a lifetime Catholic, I did not expect to hear that the Cardinals elected the first American Pope. That is now true. The consensus response is that this is a very surprising choice. I've not been this surprised since Trump carried all 7 swing states in the popular vote last November. Elected was Cardinal Robert Prevost, who was born in Chicago and attended Villanova University in suburban Philadelphia. However, he spent much of his life as a missionary in Peru. At the time of his election, he was leading the Vatican's Office of the Bishops. Some believe that this position helped his visibility to be the next pope. At 69, he's considered a younger choice. He's a member of the Augustinian order. The mission of that order is education and doing missionary work. He took the name of Leo XIV. Right after his election, he appeared on the loggia of the St. Peter's Square wearing the traditional red cape of the papacy. In his acceptance speech, he spoke in Spanish and did not speak any English. I noted some criticism of this by various commentators. On the plus side, several mentioned his obvious charisma. While it seems that the Catholic Church has been struggling, it officially claims that the Catholic population increased by 1.15% between 2022 and 2023, rising from approximately 1.39 billion to 1.406 billion. Those are some pretty big numbers, folks. Given the world population of 8.2 billion, that means Catholics are an amazing 17% of the world population. And of course, that's not evenly distributed. In my social media and Saving America broadcasts, I have cautioned that the incredible level of anti-Semitism is only a short step ahead of persecution of the Catholics. I believe both religions need to assert themselves and fight what appears to be a drive to defeat Judeo-Christian values in the world. Even though it's thought that he will not vary too much from the prior pope, some changes are expected. Some comments that I've heard is that he might be a more centrist pope, whatever that means. I wish the new pope a long and productive life.
I'll allow it.
While a deal with the CCP has been announced, I have zero confidence that the CCP will cut off illegal fentanyl supplies to the cartels in Mexico or will allow more U.S. goods into China. Part of the deal is that the CCP was holding rare earth minerals hostage. Reportedly, the U.S. has plenty of rare earth minerals. Let's go get them and cut off China completely until the people of China rise up and dump the CCP. The U.S. supposedly made a rare earth deal with Ukraine while waiting to develop our own supplies, get them from Ukraine, and at the same time help them repel the deranged attacks from Putin. Why is the U.S. holding back on critical military supplies to Ukraine? I am clear on this. Support Ukraine. How dangerous is the CCP? A third scientist on the way to the University of Michigan has been stopped at the Detroit airport for sending over illegal biological materials in advance of her visit. This is like a TV drama or a movie, except this is a real thing, folks. So just like the failed negotiations with the terrorists in Iran, nice to say you try to talk it out, but don't trust them. As Reagan said, trust but verify.
This session is adjourned.
Thanks for joining me for Saving America. If you have questions or comments, please find me on various social media sites. I'm Dr. David D. SCHEIN, and I will see you next week.
Thank you, viewers and listeners of USA Global TV and Radio, for joining us today. We're honored to have your time and attention as part of our global community. At USA Global TV and Radio, we believe in the power of authentic conversations, meaningful connections, and creating a world of possibilities together. Want to be part of something bigger? Join our team of elevated listeners at usaglobaltv.com, a space where your voice matters and your ability to listen transforms relationships. Stay connected with us across all our platforms for thought-provoking discussions, expert insights, and empowering stories. Subscribe to our channels at youtube.com/c/USA-Global-TV. Follow us on social media and explore the endless opportunities we're creating for growth, learning, and inspiration. Together, we're not just broadcasting, we're building bridges and changing lives one conversation at a time. For inquiries, contact us at info@usaglobaltv.com. Produced by Executive Producer and Director Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck. Voiceover by Mike Porter. Creative direction by Paul Garcia. All rights reserved. Visit usaglobaltv.com to view our full terms and conditions.